From national security to global corruption, this is The Muckrakers on today's News Talk, TNT.
Well, welcome back to the Muckrakers here on TNT. And we always loved little chats in between. We've got Murray in the studio today talking about scorpions, which and Martin was saying he learned so much from the Muckrakers, not least that they have scorpions in Australia. One thing they also have in Australia is free speech, but that's being eroded not just there, but around the world. And Nigel Farage, he slammed Keir Starmer, wonderful headline, grabbing stuff. He says Keir Starmer is the biggest threat to free speech in British history. Is he right, George?
I think he is. I think Starmer has always been an authoritarian. He was even an authoritarian during the COVID hysteria. He was among the worst of the purveyors of the COVID hysteria, and therefore he was all for stamping out what he called and what people like him called disinformation, but which has turned out to be correct information. And so Starmer has seized on the recent disturbances to crack down on free speech. So he wasn't content which simply to send to prisons people who didn't, throw a brick here or, set fire to something else, use violence, because that's boring. I mean, the courts automatically send people like that to prison or whatever. He went after the purveyors of disinformation. So he immediately went after the social media company, as he always intended to do. And now he is advocating, essentially within the schools, a kind of a brainwashing operation within all of the schools inside the UK to stamp out all kinds of wrong think that he's against. Now, what's also interesting in the UK is how the justice system, I mean, we're supposed to be a democracy, therefore we have an independent judiciary. And yet we see that the courts are acting entirely on the orders of the government, which is quite unheard of, because the courts are supposed to be independent. So people are being pushed into the courts, they get arrested, sent to go before a judge, they plead guilty, and they're immediately in prison. And that's swift justice. The media are, of course, approving of this. But it, again, shows that in Starmer's Britain, there isn't even the minimum of legal protections. I mean, even in the old Soviet Union, there was at least a step-by-step process, arrest, arraignment, you have a chance to talk to your defense counsel. You don't go straight, from the street and into prison for quite substantial prison terms. But Starmer, as I say, isn't going to leave it at that. Starmer is going to go after the influencers, because that's who he is. He's somebody who's in the business of stamping out ideas that he hates, and he's not going to let this go.
Yeah. Martin?
Yeah, I never thought I'd be asked to comment on Nigel Farage and free speech. I don't think Nigel Farage really likes free speech so much. I don't see him as a sort of example to hold up. In Brussels, I had an investigative magazine which I kept going for 4 years, and Nigel didn't particularly like it, and he didn't cooperate with it at all. And after 2 years, he offered a job to my partner to become a UKIP press officer, which basically put the magazine out of business. And then after that, I got no cooperation at all from Nigel and UKIP, sort of blacklisted the magazine, had nothing to do with me. So I don't know if, here's the takeaway. I've been a journalist for 33 years or something, and I've been sued more times for defamation than I can remember. And I'll tell you about free speech. Let me tell you about free speech. 99% of people who bang on about free speech are bullshit. Really. Most people who go on about free speech don't believe in it themselves. It's one of these subjects which is just rank with hypocrisy. And I don't think Nigel's an exception. He won't be very happy with me saying that. When you get sued, a number of times that I've been sued through UK defamation court by MEPs for investigating their corruption or their dirty deals, and you don't even get a chance to defend yourself because the system is stacked up so much against you. Because as you know, in UK defamation law, it's all really about money, how deep your pockets are, so free speech, it's funny how 99% of people who bang on about free speech are not at all interested in free speech at all. They just use it as a sort of veneer, as a sort of gauntlet to throw down and promote themselves. But, when what they really mean is, I really believe in free speech as long as it's within the confines of my own political ideas and my friends and such forth. But as soon as we go beyond those boundaries, then I don't want free speech at all, and I want to sort of retract everything I said about free speech. I think the biggest hypocrite in British politics is probably Neil Kinnock for this, who sued me and sued Private Eye for an awful lot of money when I had a column in Private Eye when I supposedly defamed him. Another person who bangs on a lot about free speech, but, as that classic quote in Dad's Army, they don't like it up 'em. When free speech goes against you, then it becomes a very different thing. So free speech for me is something which is absolutely dripping in hypocrisy. Hardly anybody really believes in it. Hardly anybody really cares. When I almost went to prison in Belgium for exposing the paedophile ring, I had a writ served at my present premises in my office. I had a High Court judgment made against me in the evening, at night, in my absence. It was faxed to me at 9:15 the following morning, and then the phone just rang off the hook because of Belgian journalists trying to do an assassination job on me. All about free speech, trying to report. I think when we think about what's happening in Britain right now is very worrying. We have the slow erosion of people's freedom to speak. I mean, freedom of speech for me is about total liberty, is about the real essence of democracy. Freedom of speech is ugly. Freedom is ugly. And people don't realize that. When people talk about freedom and freedom of speech, they don't realize that it's not limited. It has no boundaries. We used to have in London, you're old enough to remember, I think, Andrew, we used to have a place called Speaker's Corner, where people would stand. Is it still there? Does it still function?
Still there. And somebody, a Christian woman, was attacked by another group. It was in the papers just a few hours ago. So yes, it's still there, and people are still speaking their minds.
Wherever I've been around the world, in Africa and the Middle East, I always find educated people come up to me and ask me about Speaker's Corner, and they tell me this is something extraordinary about Great Britain. You have this place where people can stand on a soapbox and mutter absolutely anything. No matter how disgusting, no matter how vulgar, no matter how rude, no matter how irreverent, no matter how wrong. Because people in Britain used to believe in this idea that freedom of speech meant that you could really utter anything you wanted to, and it was important that you had the right to do that. I think, wasn't it Orwell who said, no, it wasn't Orwell. It was, I think, Chomsky who said something along the lines of, I'm paraphrasing, if we don't believe in free speech for the people we hate or despise, then we don't believe in it at all. And I think that's absolutely bang on the money. You've got to allow free speech for everybody. And no matter how disgusting or absurd or wrong people, talk, these people on the internet who have gone to prison in the UK, they're basically really simple people. Tracy from Stevenage, who gets on the internet and just rants a lot of racist nonsense about Muslims. What we should be asking ourselves, what we should be worried about, is that when she goes to prison for 20 months or whatever it was, we should be asking ourselves, is there a price that comes with free speech? Because free speech actually isn't free, and when people start to try and control free speech, and Labour it's starting to get its tentacles in it now. When Labour will actually get into full swing, when Sir Keir Starmer actually starts to, have his way and start swiping and chopping away, huge swathes of liberties. When the blade comes down and it takes away people like Tracy from Stevenage with their stupid racist rants, what it also does is it takes away other people's perfectly salient political comments, which don't necessarily correspond with the power that is doing that particular action. And so what will happen is that we will see in future, some of this hate speech and racism. Many people will say it's a really good thing. We should do that. We shouldn't have hate speech. But I think the danger is when you cut away hate speech and you start putting people into prison, you also allow the state, the elite, to start using the same rules to actually shut people up who just have a narrative which conflicts with yours.
Yeah, and in fact, it was George Orwell. Everybody's got a quote on freedom of speech. He was the one who said freedom is the right to tell people what they don't want to hear.
Yeah.
That's right. That George Orwell saying that sort of stuff. But you're right. I always say it's freedom of speech, but not always freedom from consequences. So if you say something which is defamatory, and basically then you will end up in court. And that's the front and center of what happens with Tommy Robinson. And there's that classic cartoon from a brilliant artist called J. Bright from the 18th century, which depicts a cow with the word litigation written on it. And the plaintiff is pulling the horns of the cow, and the defendant is pulling the tail, and the lawyer's in the middle milking the cow, because the only people who benefit from litigation are the lawyers. But the best defense for defamation is the truth, which is why you search for that sort of stuff. That's your best defense. But somebody who's a big advocate and always holds himself out as a big advocate is Elon Musk, and he's at war, if you like, with the British government over free speech. He's repeatedly calling Keir Starmer two-tier Keir about his policing methods and how you'll basically clamp down on people very, very quickly, get them into court within nanoseconds. But things like the Manchester airport troubles, which we had, where somebody was depicted stamping on somebody's head and there was a fighting with police officers and somebody got their nose broken, that's still waiting to be charged, as I understand it. What's your take on Elon, Martin? What's your take on him?
The same thing I said earlier about 99% of people who bang on about free speech, are basically BSing. I'm very skeptical. I'm very, very skeptical, because I've noticed that, he's really big on free speech, but he's also has his own politics. And if you notice, the people who he promotes, who he pushes on his own Twitter platform, tend to obviously be in line to his politics. So, I don't really buy it all. I don't believe it. I think it all stinks. I think there's a lot of hypocrisy there. It'd be interesting to see how, look, the other thing about free speech, and what we don't get from Elon Musk, what we don't get from Nigel Farage or any of these people who claim to believe in free speech, and this would be something that would appeal to you, Andrew, is we don't get any debate around defamation laws. There's no debate about the reform of defamation laws. If those people really cared about free speech, this would be one of their subjects. This would be one of their pet hates. I mean, Elon Musk, he seems obsessed with Britain. I mean, did he have an English girlfriend that dumped him or something? He really is obsessed with his country. And I know that the government is left wing and he's not left wing, and he probably doesn't like them. But he's just he seems to be carrying around some sort of grudge with him. And I'm very skeptical. I'm very skeptical about everything he comes up with. We don't get a debate from him or any claims or any demands from him that defamation laws should be reformed. If people really care about freedom of speech, this would be the first port of call. In Britain, defamation law is heavily tilted towards people who've got deep pockets. So it doesn't even matter if you're right or you're wrong. If you're a politician and a journalist gets hold of some information about you and he publishes it, the first issue is, how do you shut this journalist up using your money? You go to your brief, and that journalist gets a writ, as I got many writs from MEPs, and 90%, if not 95% of the time, that does the job. Because the first question that you're going to find from a lawyer who's going to try and help you, when I was in London and I went to see Ian Hislop, and we worked out how we're going to deal with the Kinnock case, he sent me around to his Etonian brief around the corner, a very charming young man who chain smoked Rothmans, and said, "Have you got £20,000? And I said naively, "Is that how much it's going to cost?" And he said, "No, that's how much it's going to start at." So how do independent journalists, how with small magazines of low circulation, even big media, which is cash-strapped now, how do you deal with the Kinnock factor of people who understand defamation law and just manipulate it? And what happens, what I noticed in this scenario is that within seconds of talking to lawyers, nobody was interested in right or wrong. Nobody's interested in whether this information you've got has any validity at all. It's really about the money. And so, in America, it's slightly different. It's more draconian in America. When you have a case of defamation in America, you as the plaintiff have to prove that the newspaper that's defamed you actually did it out of malice. So that takes it to the next level. It's one stage further, which makes defamation very, very hard in America, which is why, as you know, in the 80s and 90s, there was a lot of defamation shopping. You had celebrities, big millionaire celebrities and rappers and movie stars in America would do their defamation courts in the UK system based on the fact that they've been defamed on a global website, and the number of people in the UK who are reading it would therefore be affected by that reporting and damage to reputation. So I will take Elon Musk seriously and Nigel Farage seriously when they campaign for the reform of defamation law, and I'm not holding my breath.
Okay, very interesting points. And just in answer to your question, yes, Elon Musk, not only did he have a girlfriend, he had twice he married to Tula Riley, who's a brilliant British actress. There we are. You'll remember she starred in Westworld and that stuff. Told you learned stuff on the Muckrakers.
You are an emporium of useless information, Andrew.
I thank you. There's so much more to come. George, what's your take, George, on Elon?
I think it's, frankly, I'm just... Elon Musk is the best we've got. I mean, I don't see any point in criticizing him now. I mean, you remember what Twitter was before he took it over. I mean, it was actually on a rampage of deplatforming people on one issue after another. Masses and masses of people were getting deplatformed. It deplatformed the incumbent president of the United States, as did Facebook. You had university professors, Stanford University professors like Jay Bhattacharya getting deplatformed for what they were saying on COVID. I mean, and then, if you were deemed to be an election denier, you got deplatformed. I mean, this was really something that you had the social media were all in the hands of kind of the liberal left. And they were absolutely cock-a-hoop about it, because they said, yeah, this is it. We've got what we wanted. We're running these organizations, and we're just kicking off everybody whom we don't like. And then when and there was an alternative social media platform that came into being, tried to challenge Twitter, which was Parler, and boom, all the social media platforms got together. They formed a cabal and destroyed it. I mean, just everyone, Amazon, Facebook, and all of them got together. Boom, they just destroyed it. So Musk, again, he's not perfect. We can certainly criticize him for, particularly on his stance on Israel. But it's there's no question. I think Twitter has improved immensely. And so then you have to ask, well, how come then he's now become the target? Why is he so targeted by British politicians? And the other day by Thierry Breton, the EU commissioner, who sent this letter. Imagine that. He sends this letter, this threatening letter to Musk, just prior to his interview with Trump, and he's saying, well, of course, we all like freedom of speech. We believe strongly in free speech. However, you have to make sure that there is no harmful speech. You have to make sure there's no disinformation. You have to make sure that there isn't people aren't endangered in any way. In other words, I don't care whatsoever about free speech, though I pretend I do. I want to crack down on platforms that allow speech to take place that presents views that I don't like. And how do I get around it? I say, well, this is disinformation. Yeah. Now, of course, anyone who believes in free speech says, yeah, well, free speech means disinformation. Yeah, people can be wrong. That's what it is. Everyone makes mistakes. You can say things that happen to be wrong. But when you start throwing people off because of views that you don't like, then something else is going on. So we have these Labour MPs who say, yeah, well, free speech isn't hate speech. Well, it all depends on what hate speech is. I mean, it's in the eye of the beholder. I mean, if you think people saying stuff that you don't like, that's hate speech. Well, okay, then that'd be hate speech. So we can outlaw all sorts of speech that we don't like. But of course, once you do that, then you have to wonder who is posting these things on social media, because once you created the situation where you can pressure social media companies by saying, hey, look, you've got all these neo-Nazi messages here. This is really bad. You're giving racists and Nazis and fascists a platform. who's posting these things? These are all anonymous. And you think, well, we know that governments, we know about the 77th Brigade, they're sitting there, they're monitoring all these things, and they could well be posting these things precisely in order to discredit the social media companies. Oh, look at what's happened since Musk took over. Neo-Nazi tweets have multiplied, exponentially. Yeah, because there are people who are always doing this. They're always putting these things online in order to discredit a platform. I mean, like RT, which has now been banned in Europe, which again shows the free speech. You go down to look at the messages under any show, and it's all about Nazis, Hitler, the Jews. You think, why would people doing it? We have a discussion about Kazakhstan. And the messages are all about Nazis and Jews. So, somebody's doing this. Somebody's doing this deliberately to discredit the social media companies. So that's really the problem here, is that there's now a powerful force. Keir Starmer, obviously, he's in power in the UK. You have these creatures like Thierry Breton in the EU. You've got the Digital Safety Act. I think that's the one in the EU. I think it's called the Digital Safety Act. They always want safety. We're trying to protect people. We're doing it for your good, protecting you. And then you have the Online Safety Act in the UK. I think they're gonna go and try to crack down as much as possible on social media and stamp out all the views that they don't like. And I think Musk is in the way. And that's why they're threatening him. I mean, the EU is really threatening him. And he could well be just banned from the EU, could even be banned from the UK.
Yeah, you make some interesting points. And sometimes they call it a safety act. In other places, they've called it the Online Harms Act. The narrative is really important. One act which we had in 2023 was the Higher Education Freedom of Speech Act. And that was supposed to be becoming law. But all of a sudden, it's no longer going to happen. We're going to be discussing that straight after these messages.